Very excited that that you all are here because I think I would have gone to Joel Klein's session. So I'm really happy you're here. My name is Phil Handy, and my claim to fame as it relates to this subject is that I chaired the Florida Board of Education for 8 years and chaired the what we call the Blue Ribbon Commission, which sort of set the stage in 1998 and 1999 for what's happened in Florida. Joining me on the panel today, and I'll start with a couple comments, and then Matt Ladner from the Goldwater Institute is going to give you all a sense of what?
That's who's joining.
Pardon?
That's who's joining.
Okay. Is going to give you a sense of what we've accomplished in the last 12 years. John Winn was the Commissioner of Education, the second Commissioner of Education. We've had 3, and Eric Smith is in another session. He's going to join us partway through ours, and so he's the 3rd Commissioner of Education. And Christy Hovanetz has started out with us before she got her PhD, and then she got really important and worked for the department and helped run our accountability, research, and management measurement division, and now is working for the foundation, which is our sponsor today. The Florida story starts a long, long time ago, but I just want to point out 2 characteristics of our story that I think are most forgotten. One, we all started in 1998 at the election of Jeb Bush, and that certainly was an extraordinarily unique characteristic of the state of Florida and why we were able to do what we did, because he made education the #1 priority, and as most of you know, education represents 50% of a state budget. Every state's budget is 50 to 60% devoted to public education, so to make it something less than the first priority is sort of strange, but Jeb really made it the first priority, and therefore drove a lot of the reform. But just to put in perspective, in 1998, also on the ballot was a referendum. Florida's a referendum state. 23 states in America are referendum states, and as you know, we can put issues on the ballot and put them to the public directly without going through the legislature. In 1998, in a move that was fostered by a Democratic administration, Lawton Chiles and Dexter Douglas, and a whole bunch of what we would consider to be pretty left Democrats, put on the ballot an amazing referendum that changed the governance system in Florida forever and really made what happened in Florida possible. Up until that point, the state cabinet, which had 7 elected officials on it, was the State Board of Education. And they put on the ballot the proposition that the Florida voters would do away with the cabinet as it then existed, actually give up 3 elected cabinet officials, and at the same time, which was Secretary of State, one of the financial officers, and the Commissioner of Education, which heretofore had been elected statewide. And in return for giving up those 3 elected officials, which voters don't normally do, the Constitution would be changed so that the state board would now be composed of 7 people appointed by the governor with staggered terms, and the state cabinet would no longer be the State Board of Education. As you can imagine, the State Board of Education, which was the cabinet and had probably 23 different responsibilities, including the parole board and the land management and all kinds of things, wasn't talking about education policy very much. But I do want to point out that in an extraordinary bipartisan move, we were afforded the extraordinary governance system, which allowed us at that point, Jeb and this referendum were both elected or passed at the same time, to basically wipe out all existing structural issues, boards, everything related to this public education. And we created then a Board of Education which oversaw K through 20. And so we were able to put in place some pretty remarkable changes that have now run their course over 12 years and obviously been amended many times since. One of the other unique things that we did at the very, very beginning, and John, who was working for the department, working for the governor at that time, John Winn, helped put in motion, and I hope he'll talk about, is the creation of what many argue, I won't make the argument, but many argue is the most extensive longitudinal database in education in America. And that was Jeb, and that was John, and that was the sheer act of political will to make sure that the university system, the community college system, the private colleges, not-for-profit, K-12, every single, that led us to Common Course number, and it led us to all kinds of exciting opportunities that allowed, I think, in my mind, to form the foundation for the accountability and measurement system that I think has formed the basis for what we've been able to accomplish in Florida. With that, Matt.
Okay. Thank you. Before I get into my nerdy PowerPoint, I want to kind of start with a story, and it's actually from a nerdy education policy book, but a book by Terry Moe from Stanford called Liberating Learning. And Dr. Moe was at one point summarizing the history of education reform in the United States since the publication of A Nation at Risk. Now, A Nation at Risk came out in the early 1980s. It was a blue ribbon panel by the Reagan administration. It made some really strident statements. You know, it said things like, you know, we are faced by a rising tide of mediocrity in our schools. It even went so far as to say that if a foreign power had imposed these schools on us, that we'd view it as an act of war. As it is, we've done this to ourselves, right? So I was, I guess, an 8th grader in Southeast Texas in that time, and I remember exactly what Dr. Moe was describing, because all around the country, everyone got busy about education reform, right? We're all going to reform schools. We're going to do this, this, and that. In Texas, there was this giant war between the teacher unions and then Governor Mark White, which ultimately the teacher unions won. You know, Mark White wasn't reelected. But in any case, what Dr. Moe describes in this book is that what actually unfolded is what he described as a game of whack-a-mole, right? Do you all remember the game of whack-a-mole? Carnival game, you know, the mole pops up and you've got a hammer and you whack, right? So he said, well, everyone is out there flailing around in the States trying to reform education, right? But he said, well, the problem is that there's the guy holding the hammer, right? And they basically have veto power over K-12, right? That's basically the teacher unions, right? The teacher unions are a very powerful interest group. Some rankings of interest groups around the country describe them as the most powerful interest group in the United States. They're organized down to the legislative district level. They hire armies of lobbyists. They make campaign contributions. They have people go out and knock on doors during election season. They are intimidating, right? When I used to work for the Alliance for School Choice, I could go and talk to a lawmaker and try to convince them of the justice of our cause. And the unions could walk in and say, yeah, well, by the way, if you do that, you know, we'll knock you off in your primary and you'll be, you know, out of work, okay? So basically, Moe was describing this whack-a-mole, right? Whatever somebody proposed something that the unions didn't like, something fundamentally altering the K-12 system. School choice, whack, right? Alternative teacher certification, whack. You name it, whack. We don't like it. So what do, right? What was the net result of this? There were some good things that happened. Testing got introduced during this period, right? And that's not been totally realized for its potential, but you know, in some places it's done some good. There's a lot of spending increases, right? A lot of emphasis on class size, a lot of things that the unions would accept, but very little of what they won't accept, okay? But Dr. Moe basically says, look, it's not that the unions whack every mole every time. It's that they whack almost every mole almost every time, okay? And I read this and I said, you know, this is the unique thing about Florida. The unique thing about Florida is that someone actually took the hammer away from the union, right? Florida, you know, of course, they had to fight every step of the way. A lot of people in this room had to fight every step of the way. But they largely moved K-12 policy in a direction that the unions didn't want, okay, in a lot of different ways. Parental choice, a lot of other things, okay? And now, the good news is we get to see the results. Just this year, I and two co-authors of mine did a ranking of all 50 states based on the NAEP scores, which is all the data I'll be showing you today, will be from the nation's report card. It's the most reliable set of K-12 testing data in the country. And we did this comparison based only on the scores of free and reduced lunch eligible children, okay? Specifically, we ranked them according to the free and reduced lunch eligible general education students, okay? Well, why do we do this? We basically did this in order to maximize comparability, okay? You know, when we look at raw NAEP scores, you say, well, Connecticut scores well, and Mississippi doesn't score as well. Well, no kidding, right? Mississippi has 66% more free reduced lunch eligible kids, low-income kids, which we know is correlated with academic achievement, than Connecticut, right? So it's little wonder that Connecticut looks good and Mississippi doesn't look as good, okay? So we only wanted to look at free reduced lunch eligible kids. And we only wanted to look at general education kids. So ELL kids are not included in our ranking. Special ed is also not included in our ranking. It's not that we think that our rankings are perfect. We just think they're a lot more comparable than is generally the case. Now, one of the things that we did not control for in our ranking was race, okay? We basically provided what I thought was a pretty lengthy justification for this, but I can summarize it by my picture of the Marine Corps, right? If you believe the racial achievement gap can be closed, then you should not control for race. In other words, wave a statistical wand and pretend like it's not there, right? And no one, to my knowledge, has ever talked about there being a racial combat effectiveness gap in the United States Marine Corps, right? Has anyone here ever heard of that? No, you've never heard of it because it doesn't exist, right? The Marine Corps is a organization with a strong culture. It's strongly led, right? They take people and they make them into Marines. Now, obviously, the Marines is not everyone's cup of tea, right? But this is exactly what we need from our schools as well, right? It's not that everyone should go to a Marine Corps school. They need to go to a school that matches them, okay? So we believe that we ought not to control for race. So we're, that's in the background, but it's not something we accounted for. So in addition to that, we basically make the argument that our rankings are sort of, although I'm from the Goldwater Institute, we're a right of center think tank, this guy is named John Rawls. He was a political philosopher from Harvard, and he is a patron saint of the American left. And Rawls makes this argument that basically you can summarize very quickly, even though his book is 1,000 pages long. He says that we ought to judge societal ethics and whatnot from the viewpoint of, well, what if there's going to be a forthcoming world and you don't know who you're going to be, right? You could be born the son of Bill Gates. You could be born the son of an inner city single parent, okay? And he basically argues, although there are different interpretations, and he said different things during different parts of his life, that under that system, you want to leave a path out of poverty, right? You want a path out. Now, a lot of what Rawls has been used to do, I would say, is mischievous, but I think he's basically onto something here, right? And our rankings are basically asking the question, what if you were to be born as a generic poor child in America? Which states do you want to be educated in, okay? If you're a poor child in America, you're more likely than not to have a single parent, okay? Well, he's more likely than average, right? You're more reliant on the school system to give you what you need, right? There are a lot of children that are born with two parents that read to them at home and do all these other things for them that give them advantages in life. What if you don't have that same support system? Which state would you pick, okay? Well, when we did all this, what we found is that Florida, despite the fact that it is a majority-minority state, despite the fact that it is a relatively high percentage of free reduced lunch eligible kids, all these other things, and spins below the national average, okay? Florida ranked third on our rankings, okay? And they ranked number one in terms of gains. We were looking at all the NAEP tests between 2003 and 2009. Florida made number one in gains, number 10 overall in overall performance, the number third ranking in our rankings, okay? Number one and number two are Vermont and New Hampshire, a place like that, okay? So obviously you can imagine how a low-income child in Florida looks a little different than a low-income child in Vermont, okay? But the biggest gains in the country. This is a map from the nation's report card. And this is showing you fourth grade reading scores, which is the main thing I like to focus on because it is really the most important set of testing data we have. All right, we know from research that you basically need to learn how to read by the end of the third grade, or you're more or less sunk. Right? It's not that you can't learn how to read later in life, it's that it's extraordinarily difficult to read later in life. It's like foreign language acquisition. What this map is showing you are fourth grade reading scores from 2009, only for African American students in Florida, okay, which is 211, compared to the statewide averages in these other states, including my home state of Arizona. It didn't used to be this way. There is no statewide average that Florida African Americans could even get close to before Jeb Bush's reforms. Okay, they were 20 points back. Okay, now we see that they score higher than or tie 8 statewide averages. And that is the map for Hispanics. You should keep in mind that this is a test of reading given in English, right? This number is only for Hispanic students in Florida, and it is comparing to the statewide averages of all these other states. So for instance, just think about what that means. In my home state of Arizona, our score of 210 includes basically the entire sample for Arizona. So we've got kids from North Scottsdale in that number. We've got kids from Catalina Foothills and Flagstaff. All the affluent areas of our state are in that number. Only the Hispanic scores for Florida. Florida's Hispanic students are scoring more than a grade level higher than the statewide average for all students in my state of Arizona. You may remember Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, when he was in the Senate, made this joke about the racial achievement gap. He said that performance on the nation's report card is perfectly correlated with proximity to the Canadian border, right? Look at some of these states on this list. Florida's Hispanics score higher than the statewide average in Wisconsin. They tie the statewide average in Minnesota. They're higher than Michigan. They're higher than South Dakota, or they tie higher than South Dakota, Oregon, Washington, okay? This is truly amazing. These are incredible results. Now, racial achievement gap. We talk about it a lot. Wouldn't it be nice if someone actually did something about it? Well, actually, someone has. That blue line you see up here, again, these are fourth grade reading scores. These are the raw scores. Blue line on the top is Anglos nationwide, okay? The black line on the bottom are Hispanics nationwide. You see a 25-point gap. That's about 2.5 years worth of progress, okay? That's a big, the red line in the middle are Hispanics in Florida, okay? That gap went from 25 points down to 6 points and is getting close to being closed. So, just real quickly, I always end with this. I'll let other people tell you how they did this, but when it comes to education reform, I'll have what Florida's having. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Eric Smith is the Commissioner of Education. And just take a couple minutes to talk about where we are at the second. John Winn, who started all this, and Christy will then follow Eric.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much, Phil. Great to be with you all this afternoon. It's great to see this data displayed on Florida. In Florida, I think some of the key elements is that Florida's tradition of reform, the science of the reform, the choices that have been made have been strategic, have been thoughtful, have been precise, and they have resulted in the kind of work in schools and emphasis and priorities that have driven this kind of reform. John Winn was the one here early on, kind of starting this. I see my board chairman out here, Mr. Fair, that has been early on with the process over this last decade, and true champions for all the work that's gone on in our state. I spoke earlier to the larger group about some of the key elements, the issues around accountability. And everybody nods their head, yeah, we believe in accountability, but it's the thoughtful application of accountability, the painful application of accountability that is driven these kinds of results. Decisions to focus on both performance and gain scores, the improvement of a child over time, is critical in the calculations that are part of Florida's formula. The absolute priority given to learning gains in the bottom quartile has been a major contention. When I first arrived 3 years ago, it was discussed with me by a group of superintendents that thought it was just absolutely the worst thing that anybody could ever do, and expected me as the new guy, that used to be one of them, by the way. So I'm part of the club. I have the handshake and everything, that I would simply abolish this horrendous expectation that the bottom quartile could be lifted up. And that debate continues to unfold in our state. But I would say that is the priority that the state leadership gave, the legislature gave, and it resulted in this. I'm going to fast forward, because I'll let John talk about some of the early days with these components. But I would like to stress some of the other points that have kind of transcended through governor changes. Now we're into a third during this time frame. Has transcended through legislative leadership changes. And one of the great changes in the State Board of Education, the composition and so forth, chairman of the state boards have changed and so forth. So what has held Florida together? Because quite often the political football that education is, you're going to see it batted backwards and forward, and let's undo everything, and let's do it again, and let's make my own name politically, and let's start fresh and redo this whole thing. And you don't see that in Florida. You see a consistency of effort. You will see a building on. For example, early on in Florida decided to have strong standards rather than wimpy standards that everybody could pass, but strong standards. The legislature then came back with their wisdom and said, now we expect the Department of Education to make even stronger standards that are benchmarked against international measures and so forth. And so we've just gone through that round, and now we've adopted the Common Core. So the work, rather than changing from right to left to center to whatever, there's been a consistency of focus and effort in Florida that has paid off for children each and every time, and I think that speaks volumes about the leadership in Florida. But what's happened over the last 3 years, and I'll talk just specifically about my tenure there with this State Board of Education, with the legislature that we've been blessed with. Some major pieces of legislation that have built on the foundation that was established. And I'd go through a couple of them. One, obviously, the expectation for new standards that are more rigorous, more demanding, and the associated assessments that go with that. So we've done all that, doing that right now. High school accountability was dramatically modified in Florida in the last 3 years. We added to what normally would be considered part of the No Child Left Behind accountability, the 9th and 10th grade testing program and so forth for basic skills, added to it an expectation that high schools will be graded for students' participation and performance in AP, in IB, in dual enrollment, in industry certification, SAT, ACT, participation and performance, graduation rate. That law was enacted 3 years ago, fully implemented this last year. I'm telling you, watch some of the stats that come out from Florida because of the wisdom in that legislation. For African Americans, our graduation rate this first year of implementation jumped 3.5%, the largest jump of any subgroup that we have in the state. Overall, we're up around 3%. Increase in graduation rate. I asked principals, what are you doing differently? What's your strategy? They said, this is a true story, 2 of them, without prompting, said, we're paying attention to it. Now that's appalling on one side, ought to be terminated, but it also speaks to why this accountability, thoughtfully put together, is so critically important in every state in the union. It is so critical. The priorities that you place for your children and your state is so critically important. So high school accountability is huge. Numbers are jumping off the chart in dual enrollment, AP, and industry certification and so forth. The next major piece of legislation that's passed is a revision of high school graduation requirements. What does it mean when you earn a diploma from the state of Florida? We've added more requirements, went beyond Algebra 1 to Algebra 2, geometry, biology, either chemistry or physics, And the topper is that you have to pass an end of course exam to get the credit and to get the scores for your school and so forth and so on. So upping of what it means to be a high school graduate, a redefinition, moving to the NGA calculation, which excludes GEDs and so forth. And while we excluded GEDs, our graduation rate went up for all groups. Go figure. Expectation was raised, accountability was applied, and the results are simply astounding. The quieter kind of work in Florida has adopted in statute what we call differentiated accountability, which is a merger of the federal accountability program with the state accountability program. And a little bit complex, but the long and short of it is that, again, if you have schools in your districts that are moving along well with all your groups and making good progress, we really want to just have you keep doing what you're doing, and we don't want to interfere, but we will keep check. Move that on down the scale to districts that have schools that are struggling or are absolutely, without question, failing. Then the state develops a different kind of relationship, and we are going to be involved, and we are going to walk the hallways, and we're going to be a part of that. Not to take over the school, not to run it for the district, because we firmly believe that for schools to survive, traditional schools to survive, that the district has to have the capacity to fix a failing school. And so our major work with differentiated accountabilities with the superintendent's office, the central office staff, but informing them about what we see and hear and learn as we walk the hallways. So differentiated accountability has really changed the way we structure our relationship with districts and our work with districts on struggling schools. So we have continued to push the envelope. Last year, some of you that pay attention to this stuff nationally know we made a little bit of news about debating teacher quality and how best to get after that. A couple of kind of tense moments, but the good news is I think we're ready to step forward and put forth a great effort again this session. Would also say that through our race to the top work, failure in round one, accomplishment in round two, and now we do have 62 of our districts, 62 out of our 67 districts, that have signed agreements which include board, superintendent, and union leadership, that by the end of this spring, they will have negotiated agreements that will incorporate 50% of a teacher's evaluation based on student learning gains. And without that being negotiated at the district level, they will no longer be eligible for receiving Race to the Top funds at the close of this school year. So while we had some pretty intense debates last spring, the ball's been moved, and we are continuing to make good progress. So that continuity of thinking, of belief, of philosophy, of leadership is absolutely critical in Florida and in the state. So Phil, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Eric. Two things I'd just like to say. One, strong accountability and political leadership don't go together very often. We've raised the cut scores at least 3 times for our school grades, and it's a very, very difficult process for political figures who want to get reelected to then take A schools and turn them into C and B schools because they have a higher standard. It's been that's a very, very difficult process to undertake. Christy? You need a leader.
Thank you. I had the opportunity of working for Governor Bush from '99 to 2007 in education policy, and have the great opportunity to talk a little bit more about the specific reforms that we implemented during those 8 years. And then Commissioner John Winn will be able to add some anecdotes as we're going through this presentation as well, if you want to provide anything. But just to give a landscape of Florida, Dr. Ladner said a great landscape, so I won't spend too much time focusing on results. But we do have about 2.7 million public school students in the state of Florida. We are a majority minority population, and just about half of our students are economically disadvantaged and receive free and reduced price meals. And we do have close to about 1 in 5 students that do not speak English as a first language at home, so they're English language learners. Dr. Ladner provided great information on our economically disadvantaged students. This is just our average student performance in Florida. You can see our fourth graders in reading surpassed the national average and are currently number 6th in the state. Back when we started, prior to implementation of the reforms, when the NAEP was optional or voluntary for states to participate in, we were ranked 29th out of 31st, and now we're 6th out of 50th. So in those 10 years, we've made a tremendous amount of progress. And we're not just moving our students from the lowest level on NAEP to be proficient or at a basic level, we're also moving our students who are proficient and advanced up a level as well. So we're not just taking kids and moving them a little bit, we're taking everybody and moving them across the spectrum. As I mentioned before, below the national average, now we're above the national average in both 4th and 8th grade reading and in 4th grade math. We're still very close. We're on the cusp of moving beyond the national average for 8th grade math. That should happen hopefully this coming administration of NAEP. Our graduation rates is another measure that we look at using our graduation rates. They declined by nearly 7% in the 8 years prior to the reforms being implemented, and in the last 10 years, they've increased by 21%. So we are seeing an increase in our graduation rate as well. We really have 5 foundational principles that we work under. One of them is grading schools A through F. I'll spend a bit of time talking about how we do that. One of them is rewards and consequences for results, rewarding performance and allowing students to opt out of failing schools. We also have promotion and graduation requirements. You heard a bit about social promotion already this morning, that our 3rd graders aren't allowed to move to the next grade unless they're able to read. That's made a huge impact on our performance in Florida. We also fund for student success. We talked a little bit about that this morning too, where we're rewarding schools and funding schools based on completions rather than just seat time. And we also have lots and lots of choices. Competition was a big theme over our lunchtime conversation. Florida's really trying to implore as many choice options for parents as possible. So with school grades, what gets measured, what gets done. So okay, Phil's claiming this line, so we'll have a debate here.
I gave it to you.
What gets measured, what gets done. One of the biggest components, the only reason we're able to provide this presentation to you is because we have an amazing longitudinal data system. Without having a data system that can link students to schools and to their teachers, it's very difficult to make informed policy decisions. So all of the data and information you're seeing here is because we had the wisdom in the legislature and the department and in the executive to actually put together a system that we'd use to inform policy, not just collect data and information. Just a little bit, we have our Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test. This test preceded all of the No Child Left Behind. We were far ahead of the accountability game. Back in the mid-90s, we implemented our Sunshine State standards. We have since been updating and revising them, but we've been testing students in the state of Florida since the mid-90s. We've had a full comprehensive 3 through 10 system of testing students in reading and math since 2001. A lot of states grade schools or have accountability systems that put categorical ratings on schools. Florida did too. That's where we started back in 1995. We considered schools high performing or low performing or critically low performing, and that really didn't get much traction. Not many people knew what it meant to be a high performing school or a critically low performing school or what the implications really were. So we decided, let's move to a numeric value system. So we turned to Roman numerals. I ran the accountability system for the state of Florida, and I couldn't tell you whether a Roman numeral 1 or a Roman numeral 5 was the best. And arguably meant to be that way. So in 1999, the very first reform was, let's change those Roman numerals and categorical designations to A through F. There is not a single person sitting in this room or sitting it has a student in public school that doesn't know what an A means, exceptional performance, or an F, failure. And that was the #1 thing that really turned around the attention for our accountability system. So if there's anything you're trying to do in your states, you currently have AYP, or adequate yearly progress, in all of your states, a measure of accountability to be more explicit and transparent about what those ratings actually mean is the best thing you can do, and it really doesn't cost anything. All of your systems are currently in place, the data's in place, it's just a matter of having the political will to do it. So we base our school grades solely on student performance. We look at the proficiency of students in reading and math, science and writing, and we also look at the progress our students make. Critical component is looking at the progress of our lowest 25% of students in both reading and math, and really focusing on those students that are the lowest performing in each of our schools. We also look to see whether or not all students have made progress in the school, but there's that extra focus on the lowest performing students. We have 3 different ways to demonstrate that students have made learning gains. They're given credit if they increase their performance level on the FCAT, make developmental scale score increases, or maintain their proficiency as long as they're moving up a grade in school. It's a very simple formula. We have an 800-point scale. There's 100 possible points, 400 in proficiency, 400 in the lowest or the progress categories. And it's simply what % of students are making progress in each of the subjects and what % of students are proficient in each of those subjects. Those points are totaled, and in this case it's 508 points if you add up all those percentages, and that equates to a B. How you set your school grades are policy decisions with respect to how many points it takes to earn an A, B, C, D, or an F grade. We also have other requirements. We learned that once you implement really great accountability systems, people find really great ways to try and skirt accountability systems. And so one of the things we required as a testing requirement was at least 95% of the students had to be tested. So we knew we got a valid and reliable measure of student performance, so teachers couldn't encourage low-performing students just to simply stay home. Commissioner Smith talked a little bit about the revisions to the high school grades that will be released this year. There are more components to look at college and career readiness and preparation rather than just the focus that we have on the elementary and middle schools, which grading will stay the same with respect to performance and proficiency. And this is probably one of my favorite slides in the presentation that Matt hasn't already shared. But when we started implementing school grades, we came out that very first year and said we had more D and F schools than we did A or B schools in the state of Florida. And that's a pretty powerful political statement to make, is we set a standard that was high enough that not everybody was earning an A, not even a B or a C, but more schools were earning a D and an F. And within a year, people started paying attention to it. And you can see that that next year, those lines crossed and we had far more A and B schools than we did the prior year and far fewer D and F schools. Each of those dotted lines that you see on this chart represents a time that we've raised the standards. And you can see now that we have more than 5 times as many A and B schools than we did when we originally implemented the system. So having the courage to actually put a true grade or a true representation of that school's performance and those students' progress is very important, because as soon as you have an F school, people start paying attention to it. And as I mentioned, we did continually raise the standards, and every time we raised the standards, we experienced more school failures. But then you'll see that following year, after every time we had more school failures, schools learned what to do to remedy that, and we had fewer of them failing.
Time to raise them again.
No kid. So it's the success, reform, what is it? Reform is never finished, success is never final. So we continuously raise the standards in the state of Florida, and we're not going to stop doing that. Some of the things that they're saying, one of the just small stories that we have is when you grade schools, they're always reported in the paper. Housing markets are contingent upon it. You will drive by any school marquee, and if they're an A school, guaranteed it is on their school marquee the day that the school grades come out. If there's an F school, and we've had some of them in the very first year that we did school rating, A.A. Dixon and Spencer Bibbs Elementary School were eligible for vouchers that very first year. People thought there was going to be a huge public outcry that the state was going to get blasted. Quite the opposite happened. Businesses turned around and said, we don't want F schools in our district, let's do something about it. Neighborhoods turned around, parents came to the community, and they gathered a lot of support as an F school. Papers report on it, as I mentioned. Huge release goes out to the media prior to us releasing school grades, so we ensure that they're in the paper the very next day. And it's reported by every single one of the major papers for their districts and their readership areas. Rewards and failures. Part of our school grading system, we implemented a school recognition program where schools earn $100 per student if the school earned an A or if their school improved a school letter grade. This money passes by collective bargaining. This money passes by the district administrative set-aside and goes straight to the school. And the legislative intent for this money was that it goes directly to reward teachers for a job well done. Currently, we've paid out over $1.25 billion in school recognition funding. 85% of that has gone straight to school and staff bonuses. So it's the first kind of school-level performance pay system that's been implemented. We also had opportunities for students who were in these failing schools. Any school that earned an F, 2 Fs in a 4-year period, had the opportunity to take a scholarship to go to a higher performing public school or a private school. We had this program in effect for 7 years before it was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. We still continue to pursue opportunities for students to attend private schools through voucher programs, and we have other voucher programs where they're still permitted to do that. The sad thing about this was there were only 753 students out of the 2.7 million students in the state of Florida that were using an opportunity scholarship, and over 95% of them were students that were eligible for free and reduced price lunch and non-white students, so took away a great opportunity for them. Competition fuels improved student achievement. We've had several studies done on this that demonstrate that schools that were under the threat of students receiving a voucher to leave their school, their students performed better than a school that was not under the threat of their students leaving for a voucher. And so you can see we have 4 years of data where we were comparing poor performing schools that had already earned 1 F and hadn't earned any Fs yet, but had very similar performance. The schools that had students, or the students in the schools that had at least 1 F always outperformed than because they were at threat of leaving that school and going to another school. As soon as that voucher program was taken away, you don't see any difference in the performance when none of the kids are under the threat of a voucher. Quickly, performance requirements. Students in the state of Florida are required to pass their 3rd grade FCAT at an achievement level 2. We have 5 achievement levels, and they just don't have to score in that lowest achievement level in order to be promoted to that next grade. The rationale for having it at 3rd grade is from K through 3, kids are being taught how to read, and by the time they get to 4th grade, they have to do more reading to learn. So it was a pivotal year for us to have the progression law. We do have some good cause exemptions. We couldn't just implement this wholesale. There are 2 other ways for students to demonstrate grade level proficiency through either an alternate assessment or student portfolio. And students who have been previously retained more than once, students with disabilities and English language learners also have specific exemptions for them.
Just to make the note, the first year we implemented that law, 43,000 kids were retained. 43,000. And what happened was the 1st and the 2nd grade teachers got it. And we now probably, I don't know what the number is today, probably less than a couple thousand, because the pushback from the elementary school teachers was appropriate for the incentive to call out.
Right, and so the 2 things I'd like to point out on this chart is you can see in the 2000-2001 school year, we had 29% of our students that were achieving at that very lowest achievement level. 5 levels on our achievement test, and 29% of them were in that lowest level, yet less than 3% of them were retained. We implemented the policy. It took a year to go into effect, and you can see that student performance started to improve. 2 years later, we only had 23% of our kids that were achieving at that lowest level, and we had 13.2% of them being retained, so they got extra attention and remediation in that 3rd grade. When we did implement it for that first year, people were outraged by that 13%. How could you possibly hold back 13% of your third graders? The frustrating part about that is nobody was upset about the 29% that were achieving in performance level 1. So they're getting outraged about the wrong numbers. So it's being able to point out to them that here's what you should really be mad about, not the fact that we're holding them back and getting them additional help that they need. But you can see just the impact of this policy in the 10 years that, or the 8 years that it's been in effect. We dropped 7% of our kids. 7% of our kids are no longer reading at the lowest achievement level in our state. Jay Green did some research that demonstrates that retention works. It's not just a first-year impact, but does have a lasting impact on the student. Graduation requirements. We are the first state in the nation to implement a graduation requirement or require a high school exit exam, and we're the first state to be sued about requiring high school exit exams. Deborah P. versus Turlington implemented some high school graduation requirements about 30 years ago, well, over 30 years ago now, and it was an 8th grade minimum competency test. Students had the opportunity to take a test in 8th grade to determine whether or not they could graduate from high school. They had several years to pass it after that. And we had approximately 10% of our kids who did not graduate because they couldn't pass that 8th grade graduation requirement. We introduced FCAT and decided to raise the rigor on our high school exit exam and made the requirement our 10th grade FCAT, and they had to read and do math at an achievement level 2 performance level, so the second level. As a result, kids upped their game, they tried harder, teachers turned around and provided more preparation for them, and now we only have 8% of our kids not passing or graduating solely because of a high school diploma requirement for an exit exam. We're not saying that only 8 or 10% of kids don't graduate, but we're saying the test is not the reason students aren't graduating. Having high standards on your accountability assessment actually improves student achievement and does not deter them from graduation. You can see our graduation rates have continually gone up. Our top line there is our white students, followed by the all students line. The green line is our Hispanic student graduation rate, and then our black student graduation rate on the bottom. The big thing here is the more prepared kids are coming out of high school and going into college, the less likely they are to need remediation. So this is a funding issue as well. We have far fewer students in the state of Florida that require college remediation, which saves a lot of tax dollars too, because it's less expensive to educate kids in our K-12 system than it is our post-secondary system. And then just this goes back to the conversation about data, is having information readily available to be able to make these decisions about 3rd grade promotion, 10th grade graduation requirements, and school accountability. I could keep going for a long time, but
Go ahead,
Okay.
another 5 minutes, and then we
Great.
want to allow some time for questions, that's all.
okay. So funding for success, one of the things that we had stopped doing is realizing that we always set aside money for dropout prevention and for summer school, and we decided why would we wait until students fail throughout the year to provide them summer school, and allowed some more flexibility for those funds to be used throughout the school year. There's priorities on DNF schools, students who are struggling in 3rd grade, students who are at risk of not passing their graduation exam, to get them the assistance that they need throughout the school year rather than waiting until it's too late. We also incentivize rigor. We have a great program with the College Board, our College Board partnership. All 10th graders in the state of Florida have the opportunity to take the PSAT or the plan at no cost. This is the leading indicator of whether or not kids are ready to go to college, what they need to do to be prepared to go to college, and also qualifies them for a National Merit Scholarship. Students that are taking this test are considered to be on track and more likely to take the SAT or the ACT once they get into the higher grades. So it just prepares them
We
for.
found that the $65 or $75 was a constraint to them actually taking AP, and it cost us like $2 million to do this.
We also provide a lot of professional development for teachers to become AP teachers, and we provide bonuses for teachers who have students pass the AP exams. So an AP teacher who has a student pass an exam earns $50 per student for each passing mark. an AP teacher in a DNF school that has that first student pass the exam earns the initial $500 bonus and then $50 for every student after that. When you think about this, it sounds like it's going to be an expensive initiative, but $2 million here, $50 per passing exam. Any student that passes an AP exam with a 3 or higher does not have to take that course in college. They automatically earn college credit for it. So the amount of money that you'd be saving by having them take and pass AP exams, in addition to them being ready and having that rigor, they're not having to pay for it in the post-secondary system. So this is the impact of what you have. You see that we implemented the College Board Partnership in 2000. We had a tremendous increase, 366% increase in the percent of AP exams taken in Florida. So students weren't just taking the AP courses, they were also taking the exams as well. And we also had a huge increase in the percent of students passing the exams. So not only were more students enrolled and being prepared, they were also taking the courses and passing them and earning college credit, giving them a leg up when they enter the post-secondary system. Opportunities for success. This is a big conversation in a lot of states. In Florida right now, we have multiple pathways to become alternatively certified. We initially were facing a huge teacher shortage, huge teacher crisis about 10 years ago. We needed 160,000+ teachers over 10 years. Our student population was increasing. Colleges of education couldn't produce teachers fast enough. And then we had a retirement and pending retirement projections. So one of the things we did is we opened up certification to many different options and avenues. We have more reciprocity now with other states for earning Florida certifications. We accept National Board and American Board certifications. We have educator prep institutions at our community college for career changers. Districts can certify teachers through the district. You can have an education minor and then 2-year teaching experience for post-secondary. One of the other great statistics is about half of the teachers in the state of Florida are alternatively certified. They don't come through a traditional 4-year college of education. They come through some other method. And the department's done research that demonstrates that they are as or more effective than teachers coming out of a 4-year college of education. And one of my favorite small things was NASA scientists could not teach in Florida high schools prior to these alternative certification laws passing. So being able to really tap some of those resources in your states through alternative certification, there's a lot of qualified people out there. We should be letting some of them into the classroom, and alternative certification is a great way to do it. I've got 2 minutes to go through lots and lots of choices. So Florida has multiple school choice programs. This is the competition conversations that we've been having. We have McKay scholarships for our students with disabilities. Over 20,000 students participate in these programs annually. It's for parents to take vouchers for their students to either go to other public schools within or outside the district or private schools. We have our tax credit scholarships where businesses are able to donate money to foundations. Economically disadvantaged students can take a voucher and attend any public or private school using this voucher program. Currently, about 29,000 students participate in this program, and the only eligibility criteria is that they're eligible for free and reduced price lunch. Charter schools. We have some of the best, most liberal charter school laws in the nation. Right now, we have over 137,000 students in our charter school movement. We have removed caps, or never had caps on the number of charter schools that could be implemented in Florida. Multiple entities can start and sponsor charter schools, and we've also started providing capital outlay funds for building charter schools, so they don't have to, which is relatively new in the state of Florida. You can see here the line represents the number of schools, so we have over 400 charter schools, and the bars represent the number of students that we have, and currently over 137,000. We also have a couple of great virtual education programs in the state of Florida. We have over 134,000 students participating in at least one course. Private school students, public school students, home education students, anybody is eligible to take courses from the online schools. And the students don't pay anything for it, and the school is funded based on course completions. Voluntary pre-kindergarten, any 4-year-old in the state of Florida is eligible to participate and either go to a public or private provider for pre-K. They get a $2,600 voucher. Each year, these pre-K programs are evaluated based on their kindergarten readiness scores, and the bottom 15% of the providers are no longer eligible to take vouchers the following year. So they do have to have an educational component and prepare kids to enter kindergarten in order to be eligible to receive the vouchers. Here's just some more data, but Dr. Ladner did such a good job, I don't think I would do it justice, talking about the improvements of our students on our state level assessment. We focused on NAEP earlier. Elementary, middle, and our high school results. The dotted line that you saw in the middle school and high school is the impact of us having our 3rd grade progression law. You can see that we did have a big increase in performance, even though we ultimately retained very few students. We did have a big bump in student performance for those students that were subject to that 3rd grade law. And this chart, you just can't get enough of this. I can't get enough of this chart. Hispanic student performance in Florida outperforms the 31 other states and the District of Columbia. And African American student performance outperforms the average in 8 other states. We also have been recognized in many other national type publications. We are ranked number 8th by Educational Equality Counts reports. Our African American students and Hispanic students not only outperform the average student, but also outperform their counterparts at a very, very high rate across the country. We were recognized by the Ed Trust as one of 3 states in the country that was closing the achievement gap between economically disadvantaged and affluent students, and also between Black and white students. So, if you have questions.
John?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I felt my nervous tick coming back as Christy was going through her presentation, and reminded me we had one additional thing we did is we were able to communicate, or as commissioner, I was able to communicate to every teacher in the state via email, and correspondingly, they all had the chance to communicate with me email. And that kind of going back through all that, that reminds me of an email from a teacher who said, "Commissioner, I only have one question. Who in the world thinks up all these things?" And that's still, I said, I just responded that we get a lot of ideas from a lot of engaged education reformers. But anyway, what I'd like to share with you is just a few comments that hopefully kind of a way of thinking that you can see a kind of a common link between these things, because a lot of times we kind of feel like we're shooting at all these targets, different targets, without sometimes a conceptual framework of what we're getting out of all of it. And I think Tony Bennett said it best this morning by saying it's a long road, it's hard work. Everybody says that, it's hard work, but it also requires a comprehensive approach. How do you frame a comprehensive approach? One way that we thought about it was, what are the ways, what are the either the policies or practices that enable low performance? That enable low performance on the part of adults with regard to not teaching every kid to their fullest capacity. And for those of you who are exploring policy options, I just want to say that the scary part of education reform is when you start uncovering practices that nobody knows about until you look at it with a particular eye. And those are some common ones are setting your cut scores on your assessment tests and so on and so forth. But it's kind of like, okay, what are the escape hatches that allow the education community as a whole and have built up over time, and not even consciously, but are enablers for low performance? Well, if you go back before, kind of in ancient times, 15 years ago, where we didn't really have standards. And we, Florida, under Commissioner Frank Brogan, developed some what we call the Sunshine State Standards, and there was a lot of fanfare and so on and so forth. Standards give you a lot of comfort, whether they're the Common Core standards or whatever, but you really don't know what the standard is until you assess it, until you see the kinds and levels and types of questions that you're asking on your assessment to really give to full understanding. Also, it's been my experience that with the existence of standards, we by and large do not know to what extent state level standards are finding their way into the classroom, and how, and to what degree, and to what kind of fidelity. So having standards can in fact be by itself without looking at the practices of how are you getting those standards implementing, how are you monitoring that, how are you measuring that. Unless you've got the policy, the standards, but unless you complement that with the practice and figuring out how it's being done, then you could very easily miss the boat. The second, with assessment, the way the escape hatch for assessment is low cut scores. And so you set, since it's the state's practice to set cut scores and to define proficiency, and as we learned through No Child Left Behind, there was, cut scores were set all over the place. So if you set your cut score low enough, you're enabling low performance. And so Governor Bush used to say, we need to be intellectually honest about what we're doing. And if we're going to have an assessment system, we need an assessment system that does two things. It's intellectually honest with regard to our standards that we call proficiency. And two, in fact, is creative enough to where it will do what it's supposed to do, and that's drive instruction. Therefore, we had performance items developed, inquiry-based kinds of questions, not just factoids that you and I remember in school when we were taking norm reference tests and how many facts you could learn. So you try to design a test that actually drives instruction and helps support innovative, engaging instruction. So unless and there's going to be pain with high cut scores, but there's also a corridor, for example. If you're completely intellectually honest, you may wind up having, 80% of your kids not proficient. And typically, if that happens, the next thing you read is throw the bums out, because we're not willing to accept that, we have that level of, and it may be, because setting standards in an assessment is like giving a grade. It's in some respects arbitrary. It's human-made, but it is what it is. And so you can be right or wrong, too high, too low, or whatever, but you need to be as rigorous as you can be, having as close to your standard, intellectually honest standard that you can have. Another way to, in Florida, when we were taking a look at for example, our data systems, we collected a tremendous amount of data. We had data, we had school level data, finance data. We knew what every high school courses kids were taking. We knew their GPAs. We had all these data, but we couldn't correlate them. We couldn't correlate them with teaching. We couldn't correlate them with finance or anything else. So having that robust data warehouse, which a lot of states are working on now, is important. But the most important thing is, if you're trying to create change, you have to be aggressive about putting out the bad news. Because a way around we had a lot of great data, but it was heretofore used as PR. In other words, the only thing that got published was the good things. And so none of the bad things ever got published. So your data wasn't doing you any good. It was just being hidden. So unless you're being active at publishing bad news, then you're not going to move the system. The other issue with data is you have to be, you have to be honest with yourselves. And if you publish bad news, and Eric and Phil and everybody here knows this, you have to be ready to answer the question, what are you going to do about it? So it's all wrapped up in identifying where the problems are, having a plan, solution for those problems. Teacher evaluations, a perfect example. How do teacher evaluations enable low performance? And that is, everybody's familiar with satisfactory or above satisfactory evaluations. So we went to performance as a way of evaluating and rewarding top teachers. So if you look at it from that standpoint, even if you look at, for example, certification exams, and certification exams, the level setting for passing is typically one that doesn't upset the apple cart too much. So each of these practices, once you put a light on it from the standpoint of how can we make this more difficult to avoid high performance and accountability. And finally, what's been also said before is choice. Choice and competition. The final escape hatch is my monopoly. Okay, if I can weather all the school grades, if I can weather actually naming where the problems are, if I can weather all that, I can at least back up and I have a school monopoly. I have a monopoly. And with choice and competition, you no longer have that. And it's been shown over and over again. Not only is it just the right thing to do for parents and kids, but it also institutes competition, which spurs improvement. So I urge you to think about all the systems and the practices that exist in your state, and take a look at to what extent are those supporting or enabling low performance or hiding from accountability, and what do we need to do as a policy as well as the practice in order to make sure that that there are no escape hatches for doing what we ought to be doing already. Thank you.
Let me make 3 points, and then we have just a couple minutes for, one, this is a state-driven reform process, and we are blessed in Florida with only having 67 school districts. I can't tell you how much easier it is as opposed to Texas with 1,100 or whatever it is, but 67 school districts, to the extent you're trying to execute reform, is a lot easier than multiple of that numbers. Two, we had a strategic plan starting in 1998, and every budget and every program had to adhere to some aspect of the strategic plan. They hated it. You hated putting the plan together, and it took forever. But we had strategies, we had tactics, and then we had programs that actually met up with those, and we were consistent, and I think the results were that we had a consistent set of reforms that were money matched up to strategies, which was done in the public and was very interesting to watch. And then lastly, to the extent Eric ever listens to me, I've asked him to put on his desk one word: offense. And we in the world of education reform are continually on defense. We take incoming, we take incoming, we take incoming. And I am absolutely committed to the proposition of offense and actually having, this is a brand, this is a package, and we need to be selling it constantly. We got our asses handed to us on Senate Bill 6 because we weren't on offense when we passed the bill, and they beat us big. And we need to constantly in all of this be on offense. Adhere to a strategic plan and sell it offensively every day. And we're not done. We're far from done. So with that, we have 5 minutes for questions, or a question or two questions, if there are any. I appreciate your hanging in there with us for an hour and 15 minutes. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I live here in Washington, D.C., and I was wondering if y'all could talk a little bit about the politics of implementing your policies. You talked about the whack-a-mole earlier, but how did you take away the hammer, and is there any kind of best practices that other legislators here that are needing to get reelected could implement in their own states as well?
There's a story I've heard repeated several times that when Governor Bush came up for re-election in 2002, that the the teacher unions were so determined to beat him that their polling revealed that Janet Reno, you may remember, was running for governor of Florida, and their polling revealed that she wasn't likely to beat Governor Bush. So they aided another candidate who got the nomination, and then, tell me if this is true, I've heard of several sources, they took out a second mortgage on their headquarters in Tallahassee and gave it to this guy's campaign. And
Right.
they were desperate.
$7 million. Right.
Yeah, you know, like from my view from afar, and I'm going to hear from you, is that it really took a lot of courage to do what they did. And those of us in other states are very blessed because now we have the benefit of hindsight. When these guys were pioneering this stuff, you know, they were doing it on a theoretical basis. We think if we do X, then we'll get X results. The rest of us have Florida's example to look to. We could see these results, and you know, I think it should be easier for us.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Diane Hampton, and I'm a parent advocate for gifted students in the state of Florida. I wanted to get the panel's reactions to my idea, rightly or wrongly, and you had earlier spoken about enabling low performance, and so I'd couch my idea in terms of enabling low growth. The state of Florida appropriately accommodates students with disabilities with an alternate assessment, thinking that a grade level test wouldn't really be helpful to seeing where they are, what they have learned, how they progress. However, they do not allow that to the gifted student who maybe in 3rd grade can do 6th grade math. In the state of Florida, as I understand it, that gifted student still has to take the 3rd grade state test. So for 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade, that child's going to score well on the state test and the accountability system, but it was not required that he learned anything. Thank you.
Very good, yeah. I'd love to chat with you further on that issue. One of the major themes that we have, I talked earlier about the focus on the bottom quartile, but the focus on the top is huge. And the business of defining how you have appropriate rigor, depth of knowledge, depth of information, but also at the same time acceleration is key. And so I would hate to think, just like I would hate to think that we have a child trapped in a low-performing or non-performing school. I would hate to think that we have a child that's extremely bright that's trapped in a grade level that's inappropriate for their talent and their skill set. So we do have, and I'd even share with you privately the name of the legislator that has talked to us very aggressively about trying to design some specific legislation for gifted education in Florida that I think you'd find very interesting. So we'll talk to you.
Yes, sir.
I'm from the state of Montana, and we've got a largely rural population, only about 33% urban. And one of the other state senators has made the statement, you know, in these smaller towns, you know, the school is like a church.
Right.
And what is your experience on how implementation of your program played out in those smaller communities? What happened to them socially, and was it accepted? Has it worked?
By the way, we do have 67 school districts. The largest one has 400,000 kids, and the smallest one has 1,200 kids. So we have, we do deal with that.
We have a whole variety, and I'd say that yeah, I mentioned in my comments about the differentiated accountability and the different role between the state and the district and the schools. Our accountability program has, I think, been very, very effective with the small districts, the single high school districts, and we have those in Florida, or the 2 high school districts, the other ends, opposite ends of the county and so forth, that we have found that particularly the rural districts are extremely pleased with a greater state involvement, and they like the attention, they like people giving them advice, they like the support, they like the additional monitoring and so forth, and the expertise that comes with that, and we find them to be very, very responsive to the guidance that's given. And for many of these folks, again, the smaller districts, they have not had a chance to have the level of precise guidance that we've seen recently. So we see some of our strongest progress in some of our smaller districts.
Yes, sir. 2 more
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you. I'm David Clark, Speaker of the House in Utah. One escape hatch I don't think we talked about is the one, the fiscal constraint that all the states are operating within. I'm curious, with declining budgets rather than escalating budgets, what portion of this and how do we interject this into states where we don't have resources?
Yeah, I've been in the business for 38 years. They say more than 30. They're kind to me. 38 years. I've been in Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina. Worked in the private sector for a while with the College Board and so forth. Working back as commissioner. And we don't have a lot of money on a per pupil basis in Florida. And there are days that I wish that we would have a little bit more. That there's some things that I really would like to do. But our level of funding, I truly believe is more than adequate, and in some respects is a blessing, because I've been in places that have so much money, and it is never ever enough in education. It is never enough money. There's always just one more thing that needs to happen. That the field is littered with distractions. And so lean and mean, I guess, is the way we are in Florida, that superintendents, principals have to make wise choices about how they spend their dollars. And so I think the funding issue is and again, I don't know how many legislators, I might be arguing for more money this next session, but I do think that money is one of those excuses that people make about the needs of our kids, that we can structure up an accountability program, we can structure up choice opportunities, utilizing the resources that are available to us even in a down economy. And so I don't see budget as the problem that we're going to be facing. It's going to be a challenge, but those states that choose to make reform their priority, they're going to find a way to get these things adequately funded to make them happen.
Last question.
It's not a question. It
How you
is
doing?
it is certainly a commendation on Commissioner Smith's resourcefulness and skills. I'm Wayne Humphrey, the Vice President of the Central Florida YMCA, and we build YMCAs in public schools. And if you want to talk about fiscal issues and structure and savings and marshaling those resources, under Eric Smith's leadership and John Winn's leadership, we produced the Lake Nona model that for 11 years has been a straight A school across all of the outcomes. Dr. Thomas Breyer just finished, he's from UCF, School of Public Administration, just finished a data study on the school. And I would like very much, Commissioner Smith, if you would share with this group a little bit more about how we help to augment that accountability, and that when the rubber meets the road, the YMCA is the natural partner and right there, ready to improve those graduation rates, decrease in juvenile justice contacts, improvement in academic performance, parent involvement. These are all the things that impact on a local school district. Thank you.
If I could, please, and I know we're short on time. I hear people moving out in the hallway, but the Lake Nona project, the YMCA effort, and the public schools working jointly have truly created a phenomenal model, just a truly phenomenal model. So if any of you ever go to Orlando for a conference, or take your family down to see Disney World, which we hope you do this winter, pop them a note and see if you can come over for a tour, because it is the merger of these two opportunities that are just phenomenal to see together. The YMCA, the pre-K, the elementary operation and so forth, all under one roof, and works with great synergy for families as well as for children.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. We're at 3:15. Anybody wants to go ahead, but go ahead and ask your question.
No, I was just going to wrap it up.
Oh, good.